This is episode 28, The Story You're Still Telling Yourself. One of the hardest things for a man to see is the story that he's telling himself. Not because it's hidden, because he's been telling it for so long that it sounds like the truth. Think about that. Every man has a story about who he is, a story about what's possible, a story about why things are the way they are, a story about why he hasn't changed. And most of the time, he just never questions it because it all sounds reasonable. That's what makes it dangerous. The most dangerous lies are the ones that sound like the truth. The ones that sound logical. The ones that sound responsible. The ones that sound normal. Things like, I'm just busy. No. Maybe you're disconnected. Maybe you're distracted. Maybe you've been running so long you've forgotten why. Or a story we tell ourselves quite often is, it's not that bad. Maybe, but it's not getting better either. Or, this is a common one, we start comparing ourselves and we say something like, everybody struggles with this. And to some degree that's true, but that doesn't make it healthy, right? One of my personal favorites and something that just is a red flag I even hear when I say it myself, and it's when I say, I'm fine. Dude, how many men have said those words while their life was quietly falling apart? I'm fine. The marriage is drifting. Maybe you're drinking too much. Stress is building. Loneliness is growing. Faith is fading. But I'm fine. Because the story sounds believable. And here's what I've learned. Most men don't stay stuck because they don't know. They stay stuck because they found a story that lets them stay there. That one hurts. Because every pattern in your life is being defended by a belief, by some belief. Every pattern is being defended by some belief that we have. The drinking, the isolation, the procrastination, the fear, the anger, the avoidance, the striving. There's always a story underneath it. A reason, a justification, a narrative. And until that story changes, the pattern rarely does. Looking back at my own life, I can see stories everywhere. Stories that I believed for years. Stories that sounded true. Stories that kept me stuck. Some of them sounded like, I can handle all this myself. I could do this myself. But I couldn't. Some sounded like, I just need to work harder. That's a real common theme in my life. I just need to work harder. It didn't work. Some sounded like, if I can just fix this one thing, everything else will get better. It never works that way. It's this deceptive sequential thinking that I have to do this and then I'll get to that. It never works that way. But some of these stories felt so true that I built parts of my identity around them. And that's how powerful they are. The story becomes the lens. And eventually you stop seeing reality and you start seeing only the story. And that's why two men can live through the same situation and walk away with completely different lives. There's this book that I read over and over. I've probably read it a few hundred times. It's called The Science of Getting Rich, and like so many books, it's not really about what the title says. It's not really about getting rich or making money. It's about living a good life. And there's a recurring theme in there is that one of the recurring themes in the book is that two men can be in the same business, in the same environment, even in the same town, and one be successful and one completely fail, right? Why is that? There's only one answer, and it's because of the story that you keep telling yourself. One builds a story that limits him. The other builds a story that frees him. And brother, this is where things get interesting, because once you start recognizing the stories, you begin noticing something else. Most of them didn't come from God. Most of the stories that we believe in aren't the ones that are imprinted on our DNA in our hearts, in the bottom of our souls. They're not the story that we believed when we were kids, right? Fear wrote some of them. Shame wrote some of them. Pain wrote some of them. Failure wrote some of the stories that we now believe about ourselves. Other people wrote some of them. And you've been carrying them around as if they're the truth. For years, maybe, like me, decades. The question isn't what story are you telling? The question is who wrote it? Because that's where freedom begins. Not when you force yourself to think positively. This isn't, we don't do woo-woo nonsense stuff here, just think better, That's not what this is about. It's when you finally tell the truth. And the truth has a way of exposing bad stories. One of the biggest shifts in my life happened when I stopped asking, how do I fix myself? And I started asking, what if the thing I'm believing isn't true? That question changes things, man. Because if the story isn't true, then maybe the future isn't what you think it is either. Interesting, right? Maybe you're not stuck. Maybe you've just been listening to the wrong narrator. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're carrying an old story that no longer fits. Maybe you're not disqualified. Maybe you've simply mistaken a chapter for the ending. Brother, the stories we believe become the lives we live. Because this is why this matters. Because if the story is wrong, the direction that you're going is going to be wrong too. Just a couple degrees different set of the sail takes you in a completely different direction. Scripture says you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. It's in the Bible. And notice what sets a man free. Not motivation, not willpower, not information. Truth. Because truth destroys lies. And lies lose their power the moment that they're exposed. So here's the question I want to leave you with today. What story are you still telling yourself? The story about your marriage, the story about your business, the story about your past, the story about your future, the story about who you are. And more importantly, who wrote it? Because man, dude, the life you've been looking for may begin the moment you stop believing a story that was never true in the first place. So listen, if somewhere in this episode you recognize a story that you've been carrying for years, head over to resurrectionkings.com. The podcast, the Real Fight Field Guide, the Severn app, and the coaching path, they're all there. Because most men don't need a new life. They need a new story. And we're just getting started.